evening. We'd like to call to order a meeting, a regular meeting, our last regular meeting of the 2004-2005 Council, and we have all members present. I am acting as President of Council in the Mayor's absence because Bill Bias is the Mayor. And so I will be voting as a regular member of Council, and we'll go from there. Some of you are familiar with this. You've been here often enough. Okay, so we have 7 members here and ready to vote. The disposition of minutes is the first thing on the agenda. We have regular session November 21st, special session November 28th, special session November 30th, regular session December 5th, special session December 12th. Could I have a motion to accept
I
those
move we
minutes?
accept the minutes of November 21st, November 28th, December 30th, December 5th, November 30th, December 5th, and December 12th.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved 7-0. Communications. As far as I know, I have nothing. Reports and communications from other elected officials. Dale.
Madam President, move approve or acceptance of the financial reports for November.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of accepting the financial reports from November, say aye.
Aye.
Those are approved 7-0.
Thank you.
Any other? Mayor, do you have enough report?
No report.
Kathy, you do?
I have a couple things tonight, ma'am.
Okay.
I'm going to do a report on our audit for 2004, actually. Dale asked me to do this a few weeks ago. I'll try to go through it quickly. Anyway, I think I mentioned that we had...
Kathy, oh, you have a, is she okay?
She has a mic.
She has a mic, okay.
Table mics.
That we had 10 comments, the first 3, and that's compared with 16 from last year, so we did have fewer comments in our management letter. The first 3 had to do with the Ohio Revised Code non-compliance, and of course keeping in mind that by the time we get these comments, the next year is almost over, but we were ahead of the game this year. The first one had to do with project advertisement, and we're really very good about that. That comes out of the Service Safety Director's office. It's Ray Hazlett, actually. They couldn't find the advertisement. We didn't have a copy for one advertisement. They found the rest of them. We couldn't track that one down. But of course, now that we know, they'll be more careful about keeping their own documentation of that. The second one has to do, and this is also has to do with projects. But the city has to verify that contractors who enter into contracts don't have any findings for recovery that have been issued by the state. What happens is the contractors usually provide that verification, so we don't double check it. So now we will verify that and keep that in our own records that that has been done. Number 3 under the Ohio Revised Code has to do with the certificate of the fiscal officer, which is me. What happens is sometimes purchases are made and POs are signed after the fact. And what we needed to do, and we knew this at the end of last year, this is actually 5 out of the 10 things that we had comments on have already been taken care of, but they weren't reflected in the 2004 audit, but they have been done all of this year. One of them being the acceptance of our financial reports by council. This is another one. We ordered a special stamp that shows that we recognize that these purchases were made before I signed off on a PO, which of course is going to happen, but the auditors want to, to see that we recognize when that's going on. So we've taken care of that. The other matters for improvement that they commented on, one has the cost allocation from the general fund. Instead of transfers in and out, they should be listed as expenditures and revenues. And that we started, we knew that. It's just the way it's shown in our record keeping. And so instead of just transferring between funds, it's shown as expenditures and revenues instead of interfund transfers. So that also is another one that we have been doing for all of 2005, which should be shown in our next audit. The next one there would be is a similar thing for the administrative cost allocation. It's the same thing. When we charge other funds for the administrative costs that are borne by the general fund. And it's a similar kind of thing where we don't show them as transfers, but we show them as revenues and expenses. Revenues, in our fund, in the general fund, and expenses for the other fund that we provide services for. And that one has also been taken care of. The third one has to do, talking kind of fast, but has to do with reconciliations performed at the Recreation Department. The auditors talked about how that has more to do with checking. It's not, reconciliations are done by the Recreation Department every day, more than once a day, but they need to be initialed and documented by different people. It's a checks and balances kind of thing that we deal with a lot in our offices. It's the second set of eyes. I think they have that going on, but it hasn't been documented. So they know about that, and we'll take care of that. Number 4 has to do with the Utilities Department. And this one has to do with the monthly reconciliations. Anyway, that should also be done, be taken care of with the new software system. Okay, there have been issues with reconciliations, and there's been a carryover for several years before I got into office. And that happens, but at some point we have to write it off the books. Like when a business goes bankrupt, we know we're not going to get their final sewer and water bill, and we need to write it off, but we've been carrying those amounts for years, but now we have changed that and with the new software system, and so that should be taken care of in the next report. Next, this one is also one that we've corrected for 2005. That would be the council approving our financial reports every month. Number 6 in this part has to do with our tax department, and it talks about the delinquency reports and reviews. Letters are sent out, and we try to follow up on that. But we only really have 2 people working in our income tax department, and so those delinquencies aren't reviewed as often as they might be, and they are done, but we will make an effort to look at those more often. We do keep a file on that. We do look at them, but rather than every month, it might be 2 or 3 months when we resend letters. Next has to do with the auditor's department, and this has to do with our capital asset valuation, GASB 34, the new reporting. We've been working on this. We have until 2007 to get in line with the new requirements. And we have now, this year, contracted with a consulting firm to help us get that fixed or capital asset reporting in line for the auditors. And so that would be it. I could go through a few that were in last year's audit that we addressed that weren't addressed again, having to do with bonding. I have a tickler file. I won't name names about people who were bonded, but we have taken care of that, and I send out notices. Everybody on council is bonded. I think you know that, but Debbie does a good job of making sure that happens.
Takes care.
And so we've done a lot better on that. Our amended Dale, of course, always pays attention to our certificate of resources, and we've done that always in the past, but they would like us to do it at least quarterly, so we've made an effort this year to do that more often. Our bank reconciliations are now done in a more timely fashion. That's really done by our treasurer with help from our office. So now we have a system going for someone in our office to get those to a certain point, and then the treasurer takes those over. So we've been caught up on bank reconciliations for quite a while now. Policies and procedures, this is always an ongoing thing as things change, but credit card usage, cell phone, frequent flyer miles. So after last year's audit, I worked quite a bit and got information to get policies in line for the city. It's very hard to do it for the city. Each department has different issues, but the auditors like to see that. So we did do that. And the interfund borrowing, that was another one, which will actually come up tonight, but from the sewer fund to the cap fund, the money that was borrowed, and to have that in place, but that ordinance was passed, early last year, so we have taken care of that. So I think we've done pretty well. Any questions?
So this is a yearly event, right? If my memory is correct. So when does this next audit come up for 2005? and when-
It comes up in the spring.
Okay.
What usually, the schedule usually is, our year-end actual closeout won't probably be until February. By May, we need to have all of our reports to our auditors, whoever's auditing us, and that audit is due to the state by June 30th.
Okay.
We did make that timeline this year, the year before, because we had to go out to bid for auditors. The state couldn't audit us, we had to go out to bid. We have a private firm who has a 3-year contract auditing us, and so this year, that's part of the reason it went much quicker this year, because they are familiar with us. Now, we will be looking at going out for bid again in another year, but we had asked for 2 or maybe 3 extensions the year before, and we didn't get our audit back till the end of the year, so we were at least 6 weeks ahead of the game, and our audit figures have already been published in the newspaper, and so that's the timeline. June 30th is when it's due to the state, and what happens with them is then they look it over, and then it's posted on the Auditor State's website. If we don't get it to them in time, which is what happened the year before, and I think probably happens to many other entities, they don't actually publish the audits during election time, because it might affect the elections if any adverse figures came out about someone who is running for office. So if you don't get it into them about 6 weeks before election time, they won't do anything with it until after the election. They don't look at it, they don't do anything. So, but we got it in, so that's it. By May, we need to have all of our reports in line. And what we've had to do is, we don't do our own general ledger figures. We also have another auditing firm that prepares our financial statements for the auditors. And we hope in another year or so to be doing that in-house. But it's a big job, and we depend on them to do that. So what they do is take our information and convert it from the way we keep our books to how the auditors want it to publish in the report. So that's part of what goes on in the spring. We will be starting our next audit, early in the year, and certainly by February, we will be sending information off to our consultants that prepare our statements, in hopes that they will get that to the auditors by May.
It sounds like most of this has been done already. So, I mean, in terms of this report for this year, as you stated, all the points have been fixed for the most part.
We've done a lot, but I'm sure they'll find something next year, and
Okay.
I don't know. And they do concentrate, like I mentioned, those 6 items that we had corrected from the last audit that they didn't mention this time around. And what does happen is they look at certain things from one year to the next. I expect them to look a lot at cell phone usage this next year. Last year, they told us the state auditors were pretty interested in opportunities for fraud. They look closely at like any points that we take in money for the city, like court, the community center, utilities, billing, and they looked at that a lot a year ago, but they didn't, concentrate so much on that this time. But usually they have certain areas that they really, really look closely at. There's a lot of things for them to look at. But.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kathy.
Thanks.
Next, Gary Hunter, Law Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Several things tonight. As most of the council is aware, we've been in negotiation with the fire department for a very long period of time, close to a year. That agreement was reached last month. The contract has now been typed and approved by the administration and the union. That's up for first reading tonight. I would request that council consider suspending the rules on the fire contract and adopting it so that the retroactive pay can be computed by the auditor's office and paid in the early part of 2006. Again, for council's information, the public information, that agreement is a 3% salary increase for each year for 3 years. contains an insurance concession to the city that brings the copay provision in line with what we have for the non-union personnel in the city, and contains minor adjustments in the uniform allowance and command pay. The police negotiations have also reached a tentative agreement, which I'd like to brief council in an executive session tonight at the conclusion of tonight's regular meeting. The only other item I have for council, but I know there's a high interest in among the public tonight, is the ethics opinion has not been received concerning the Retirement Village PUD. I did not expect to receive it tonight. The ordinance is up for second reading. I do have an indication from the Ohio Ethics Commission that we should be able to expect the decision before the end of December. That'll be council's decision on whether they want to go forward. It'd be my recommendation that council not go forward on the third reading of the ordinance for adoption without the ethics opinion being received for your consideration. Other than that, Madam Chair, that's all I have tonight.
Thank you. Any other issues? All right, ordinances for third reading. And 12105, an ordinance amending ordinance 07504, authorizing the reconstruction of Pomeroy Road. Paul Weil.
I move adoption of 12105.
Second.
Okay, this is for two different aspects of it. Section 1 covers, if my memory is correct, appropriating some of the money for design to get that money in line. We already started that up a while back. And it's also to increase the amount that we're going to be paying forward for it. Most of the money, which is a total of $847,000 for the street rehabilitation of Pomeroy Road, is coming from the Department of Transportation. And it's so they can fix it up to turn it over to us.
Thank you. Any other comments on 12105? Audience? Hearing none, all those in favor of 12105, say aye.
Aye.
The ordinance passes 7-0. 02405, an ordinance amending ordinance 011904, reallocating revenues from city income tax and declaring an emergency.
Madam President, move adoption of 012405.
Second.
This ordinance and the two that follow are what we have called the budget ordinances. I'm going to give you a very brief synopsis of the process that's led us to this point, and then I'll raise a couple of particular issues with each ordinance. We started talking about this in October on the 11th, and we met on a fairly aggressive meeting schedule to really lay out all of the considerations that we needed to move into to approve a budget. It's pretty much what we do every year, but I think it's instructive to at least to run through them briefly. One is we rely on the auditor for the general revenue estimates for the next fiscal year. We cannot spend more than the auditor says that we have to spend. So those projections are particularly important, and she played a vital role in this whole process, and it is a projection. So, but we have faith, right? Then we went through various other aspects of the budget. We made general fund projection. We also made other revenue projections based on the fees that we charge. We also raised some fees. We looked at a study by a company named Maximus that helps us to allocate the true costs of various services to the city, and there have been some fees that have been increased, notably housing fees, the fee for the rental permit. You'll also see later on some fee increases in the other service areas, but that was a thoughtful exercise that will allow us to do some things this next year that I think folks will be pretty satisfied with. We also talked about our continuing expenditures. When we give staff a raise, that's a continuing expenditure, okay? We have to do it next year and the next and the next. That's different than buying a fire truck or doing something else. So we talked about many of those continuing, or all of those continuing expenditures and allocations, not the least of which were prescription drugs. You know, we are a self-insured entity, so our medical costs go up every year. We also have an obligation to pay our people a market wage, and the ordinances that follow will reflect our attempt to maintain pace. And finally, we talked about one-time projects, capital expenditures, and those types of things. This is streets. This is the things we need to do to the plants to keep them compliant. And so the budget reflects all of those things. This ordinance 12405 in particular deals with the allocation of the income tax. We talk about the general fund, that's what we're talking about here. There are certain parts of the general fund that are earmarked for particular purposes. One of those purposes is for street rehabilitation, another purpose is for the debt that's associated with the community center, and another is the expenses that are associated with the center. Those things come off the top. Then we allocate the rest of it. This ordinance allocates the rest of it, roughly 80, I think I'm doing my math right, 84.85% of the remainder gets allocated as follows. 74% goes to the general fund, and that's police and fire and those types of operations. 19% go to streets, so we're maintaining our commitment to continue to fix the streets. And I think with Paul's leadership, we did a good job of taking a bite out of that this summer, and we'll continue hopefully into the future. 5% goes to the recreation fund. We believe that it serves the public good to maintain a robust recreation and, I would say, arts program as well. And then 2% go to capital improvements. This ordinance allocates that. That's a little bit of a change in the mix. We've talked about change in the mix. We're changing the mix. We're putting a little less in the general fund because we received a strong recommendation from the auditor about how our general fund revenues were going to proceed. So we've taken the allocation down a bit in the general fund. We've increased it in streets, and we've increased it modestly in the recreation fund, and the capital fund stays the same.
Other comments on 012105? 12405, pardon me. Yes, Paul?
So this will change from year to year on a basis depending on need and the income. And thanks for doing it for the past couple of terms.
Other comments? Audience?
I've numbed them into submission.
All those in favor of 012405, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance is adopted, 7-0. 012505? An ordinance to make appropriations for current expenditures and other expenditures of the City of Athens, Ohio during the fiscal year ending 31 December 2006. I guess we covered that in the last discussion, didn't we?
Well, I would move adoption of 0125.
That'll be good. That'll be good.
This is the annual appropriation ordinance where we lay out how much we believe we'll be spending in different areas. This is in the general fund, this is a almost $10.3 million budget. I believe this is the first time we've crossed the $10 million threshold in a budget that has passed in this appropriation ordinance, I think. I would note a couple of things, that if you add the fire and police together, that amounts to almost half of the general fund. So and then if you look at it in another way, over $8.3 million is in personal services. So people are what we spend our money on, and would make sense. We're a service. We provide services, and the budget reflects those priorities. The only other thing I would raise is just a couple of things. If you add the total budget up, general fund plus our other funds, we are $29.6 million. That includes water and sewer and community center fees and the like. Our medical insurance costs, I mentioned we're self-insured. We are at almost $2.4 million on medical insurance. That's what we're spending to insure our staff. So on our total budget, we're looking at almost 10% of our expenditure is spent on a very significant benefit, which it's in our interest to provide, but we're like everybody else. The expenditures are going up. Again, this reflects the general fund appropriations and also appropriations by fund. I don't think that's probably more than people wanted to know, but we spent a lot of time on this, and so I hate to just sort of move it and then not say a word about it. But people, and this was a group effort. We have a finance and personnel committee, but as you've noticed, people feel free to chime in, anytime. And so we operated as a committee of the whole, and everybody got their 2 cents worth in on the budget, and so this is the reflection of that work.
Other comments on 012505? Paul?
Just to chime in, This is a projection based on projections, as you stated before in the earlier ordinance, and we'll be referring to this off and on the rest of the year as we tweak it, I imagine, because that's what we always do, it seems.
Okay, other comments? Hearing none? All those in favor of 12505?
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance passes 7-0. 12605, an ordinance authorizing staffing levels, a non-union pay scale, and slotting for the fiscal year ending 31 December 2006, repealing all ordinances inconsistent therewith and declaring an emergency. Mr. Tamke.
Madam President, move adoption of 012605.
Second.
This ordinance does several things. It slots all of the non-union staff. It codifies the pay level that they'll have for the next year. A couple of things I'll point out. We have allocated a 3% raise pool for our non-union staff. The raise pool is a pool of money. It is a pool. It's a pool of money that's allocated to the department head to allocate within certain frameworks. So we allow for merit raises. We allow for those types of distinctions if the department head would seek to make those. We also raised the non-union pay scale, making a market adjustment of $2,000 in the bottom 5 slots. We basically raised the whole scale by $2,000, and that was based on a market study that we had done 2 years ago. We were unable to do that last year because we felt like we needed to be we wanted to sort of stay a little closer to the revenues that we thought we were going to have. We feel like we're able to do that for our staff this year, and so this reflects that. It also reflects how many staff we believe we're going to have. I'll point out one thing. We have approved the addition of a planner, a full-time planner, to the City of Athens staff. That's, in my view, significant. We did it through the efforts of the Maximus study. We were able to pay for it by our fee adjustments. So this is not a general fund issue, this is a fee issue. And so we're going to be able to do this by, through the revenues that we generated by the fee increases that we have passed. Many people have said, maybe some sitting in this room tonight, have suggested to us that we ought to hire a planner, and I just thought I would point out that this particular staffing ordinance allows for that to happen.
Other comments on 12605? We could also add that we haven't filled the GIS position, and we'll have that money also.
Right.
We have other unfilled positions.
There are many unfilled positions that are on that we have allocated, or we have authorized the staffing to happen, but they're open because we have had a soft freeze to be able to sort of hold on to the salary savings and sort of see how we're going to come out. And you've probably heard about that.
Other comments on 12605? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0 the vote.
Thank you.
12705, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract to provide financial support for the operation of the Athens Area Chamber of Commerce. Kevin?
Madam President, I move adoption of 012705.
Second.
This ordinance is a renewal of a contract that we've had in place with the Chamber of Commerce to provide economic development services in the community. This year, we approached this a little bit differently after some discussion about wanting to get more specific and have more accountability in our contracting. Jennifer Simon from the Chamber came in and participated in some committee meeting discussions of this, and we laid out a more detailed scope of work that defines the activities that are really being done for the city through this contract. So I think that we have a high level of agreement that these are things that really benefit the community at large, and this extends their contract for 3 years.
Other comments on 12705? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's adopted, 7-0. 12905, an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 29, Housing Regulations, Chapter 2903, Rental and Dwelling Housing Permit. Mr. Tamke.
Madam President, move adoption of 012905.
Second.
This is a loose end that I'm kind of glad we're tying up. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to, what this ordinance does is that it says that in a permit holder, a rental permit holder will cause to be delivered to their tenant annually a form that basically lets them know about ordinances that they need to be compliant with. Now, they have to be compliant with all of them, but we have heard off and on over the years that folks say, well, geez, I didn't know about the solid waste ordinance, or I didn't know about the noise ordinance or the nuisance party ordinance. So what we're going to cause to happen is annually, before September 30th, we want every tenant to receive this notification, sign that they received it, and return a copy to the code office. Because we feel like it's part of our obligation to say, when people say they don't know, to say, okay, we're going to do our best to have you informed about these ordinances. The form itself is not part of the ordinance, which means we can change the form as we need to without having to come back and redo the ordinance. So we're going to try this. This comes under the heading of we're going to try something and see how we do it. Are we going to get everybody? Probably not, but we're going to make a game attempt at pushing information out to tenants about some things that we think are important and things that they need to know. And I'm sure there'll be adjustments made to this as we go along. We have talked to landlords about this. I've talked to landlords myself, and the response I got was, well, if you guys can come up with the form, we'll be glad to do it. So I figure, okay, we don't have to have another conversation about that. I kind of like to hear that part. So we're going to try this. And we talked about this in committee. This has been an ongoing discussion for some time, and it's a baby step towards getting some information out to people, and we'll see how it works.
Just to continue on, we borrowed heavily from the University of Florida from Gainesville and
Georgia.
And Georgia.
University
So
of Georgia.
we're not striking out on our own. And also, we have attached the form that Debbie worked up to the ordinance so that it'd be relatively smooth start.
Yeah.
And hopefully, it will be online. So
That'd be great.
that would even be better. Yeah. Okay, other comments on this, Paul?
So the form that is attached is not the one set in stone, it's a draft, is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Okay. Sure.
I just have a question, and that is, at what point will these begin to be distributed, and how are they to be distributed? For example, not all rentals occur in the fall, and so will they go out at the time of rental permits? So when you pay for your rental permit, you receive these, or do you have
The
That's
ord-
addressed
an
that?
administrative matter. It would seem to me
Right.
that if you put the form on the web, that the obligation for compliance and downloading and printing the form goes with whoever has to turn it in, and they just have to meet the September 30 deadline.
Okay, regardless of what time of year the...
Yeah, I mean, that would be one way. The other way would be for us to print 5,000 two-part forms and have them available for people to come pick up and
Sounds like a paper night.
do that as well. I don't know, I think it's something, it's one of those issues that is going to, as we move forward, there are a few months to get the administrative details ironed out. I'm sorry, I sort of interrupted somebody over there.
Gary, did you want to?
Well, the ordinance just specifies it has to be filed by September 30th, so you've determined the year to be October 1 to September 30th, and they'll just be made available, and the landlords will have to see that they file them for that particular year by September 30th.
Jim?
But then there's also language that says changes subsequent to September 30th shall also be reported. So whether that meant a sublease or a lease that was signed in the spring shall also be reported. So,
And that's the provision that gives me the most heartburn about how it's going to work, quite frankly.
Right. Well, and always the beginning of something like this is the most difficult part, and I just was wondering how detailed that process had been considered at this point.
It's a long ways away.
I guess it remains to be seen.
We may hear. Other people, anyone else?
I'd just like to say, I think this is an excellent step in the right direction, and I'm glad we finally got this up, and we're going to pass this ordinance, because I feel a lot of tenants who come into our community aren't exactly well-versed in city code, and this is just a way to share the information for tenants and landlords both to know their responsibilities and so they can both hold up their end of the bargain. And I think if we keep on going in this pathway, it'll be great to promote sort of the civic responsibility and just the relationship between landlords and tenants throughout the community, make it a little better than it has been in the past.
That's good. And I'd also like to thank our clerk for putting together the form. That was a mighty task, and she did a fine job. Thank you, Debbie. All right, yeah.
One other thing, I think the form is good. One thing could be in addition to it is actually a website for where all these citations are. I mean, in other words, city code location.
Hot link to maybe.
Yeah, at least one, so they're looking at the hard copy and they can say, what does this 230801 mean, and where do I find it, and what's peripheral to it? If they really want to do their homework.
That will be, what an optimist. Okay. All those in favor of 012905, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance is adopted, 7-0. 013005, an ordinance amending Athens City Code Title 27, Land Development, Chapter 2701, General Provisions. I'd like to move adoption of 013005.
Second.
It's been moved, okay. 013005 was brought to us by one of the citizens committees that got started as we put the comprehensive plan together. They asked us to put in that early part, in actually a non-actionable part, our basic assumption that future developments will not include Scalping Hills. And I think that's the nature of what's going on there. And so, can I read it once? Do we have it right here? Yeah. This title is adopted to encourage planning to ensure that new development, while preserving the general shape and size and natural topographic features of the terrain, that's what we're adding that phrase. Okay, so that's our citizenry at work, studying this carefully, and 013005 is what we have under consideration. Other comments or questions? People in the audience? None. Okay, hearing none, then, all those in favor of 013005 say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance passes 7-0. 013105, an ordinance amending amending Athens City Code Title 5, Public Utilities, Chapter 5.03, Water Regulations. Does anyone else want to? I would move adoption of 013105. I should have passed more of these out. All right, 013105 attempts to recoup some of our costs of going out and turning on and off meters. And in the spirit of having the beneficiary pay, that's what 0131 does. We may have some more in the future, in the near future of this. But this one is going to raise the fee for turning off and on to, beyond what it is. It's a real pittance now, and we're going to raise it to a point where it's pretty close to the cost of sending a person out. Anybody else a comment on 013105? Nope. All those in favor of 013105 say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance passes 7-0. 013205, an ordinance granting a revocable license to Brad Jiggaman, owner of 15, 17, and 19 Bayard Street, to allow parking on the city right-of-way. Dale?
Move adoption of 013205.
Second.
This comes to us as a result of a change in ownership of a property. Revocable licenses are granted to individuals when properties change hands. We generally have to come back and revisit the notion of the revocable license. The use is not going to change. The original license was given for this purpose, and this just maintains that particular use of this property at, looks like three numbers over on Bayard
15,
Street.
17,
Yeah,
19.
over in First Ward, right? Yeah.
Other comments on 013205? Yeah.
Okay. This basically is a change of ownership there. This has been part of their off-street parking, so it assists the actual rental there to continue being in compliance and conformity. And again, as you see in the section, I think 3 there, this will be revisited every 10 years like all the other revocable licenses.
Or with change of ownership.
Or change of ownership, whichever happens first.
I believe we established in our discussions that there was no way the alley could be opened because
The
other
other end
people
is
have
closed off, too.
revocable licenses, so it's not
Yeah.
it's not a problem for someone else. Okay, other comments on 013205? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance passes 7-0. Now we're going to move on to ordinances for second reading. We normally whip through these, but I don't think that's going to happen tonight. I will read them, and then we will combine O-12005 and O-13305 comments, please, and I will read O-12005 first. An ordinance approving a planned unit development proposed by National Church Residences on Stimson Avenue and granting a variance. And we normally don't ask the person who has sponsored the ordinance to speak, but if Jim Sands would
Did you
like
want
to.
I guess I didn't understand. You said you were going to combine them. Do you want to read them both, and then I'll, or
Okay, do you want me to do the one in
I-
between, and then, okay, we'll do that. That'll be even better. O-12805, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to extend the current contract to provide financial support for the operation of the Athens County Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Madam President, I move for suspension of the rules on O-12805.
Second.
The reason for the suspension, this actually has been read twice at this point, but we did amend it at the last meeting. That's why it's on a second reading. And the reason for the amendment was to add a scope of service to this contract as well, to make the process similar to the Chamber of Commerce practice. The differences in this contract and last year's, or the last time we had one of these, was this is a 3-year contract, and it had previously gone to a 2-year, but the idea was to get the Chamber of Commerce and the tourism contracts parallel, so that they would be renewed at the same time. So we now are awarding a 3-year, and that was what we agreed to with the Chamber of Commerce as well. The only other difference in this contract and the one from 2 years ago is that there's a allotment for $12,000 to use towards the tourism grants. It was previously in the contract as $16,500, but then that was rescinded by council, and so last year there was really no match from council. So we are putting it back in at the $12,000 rate for this contract. The city also agrees to pay tourism 35% of the tourism funds, that the bed tax that comes in goes to the Convention and Visitors Bureau to operate and to make wonderful things happen in Athens. And along with that is a scope of service that Sally Dunker put together. Oh, I got sidetracked. Sorry.
Okay, we won't have to talk about it. All those in favor of suspending the
Wait a
rules?
minute. Carol, I assume you're moving to suspend the rules because it's effective on January 1? and-
Yes.
Right.
Did she say that?
Thank you. Think so.
All right. That's good. All those in favor of suspending the rules?
Aye.
Okay, the rules are suspended.
Madam President, I move to adopt 12805
Second.
All right.
for all the reasons I just stated and the explanation that I just went through.
Very good, thank you. And it's performance-based again? And thank you, Carol. Anyone else? I've already signed it. All those in favor of, better pass. All those in favor of 12805, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0, it passes. 13305, an ordinance granting a revocable license to Ohio University to allow the development of a continuing care retirement community that will encroach on the city right-of-way. Councilmember Sands.
Madam President, as you said, these two ordinances are related because they're both dealing with this same proposed project on Stimson Avenue. One is what we call the development ordinance that would approve the plans for development. The second recognizes the fact that the development will encroach upon the city's right-of-way for the extended, the possible extension of Morris Avenue to the Hocking River. The Planning Commission, in their recommendation to the council, suggested that we vacate this right-of-way or gave us the option of granting a revocable license. We've chosen the revocable license route. Earlier this evening, the law director commented on the status of a complaint that was made to the Ohio Ethics Commission regarding votes on these two ordinances. In his suggestion to us was that it would be wise not to take a vote, not read this for a third time, which would then entail a vote, until we have some opinion from the Ethics Commission. I'm going to suggest that we abide by that suggestion. If we do receive an opinion from the Ohio Ethics Commission before the end of the year, we will attempt to schedule a special session to read these for the third time and take a vote. The special session will require a 24-hour notification. As usual, it'll be published in the newspaper. The government channel will run information about any proposal for a special session. The clerk of council will be available in the office. So we'll publicize that as widely as possible if that were to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Sands. Other people wishing to talk? Paul?
So Exhibit A is now with it, I see.
Exhibit A is with it. I think you have a copy of that.
And that-
Actually, Exhibit A was in the council chambers for quite some time, several months. It just was never attached to this revocable license ordinance. And now if you have a stapler, you can attach it.
Other people? Okay. I would personally like to state that we have several items, conditions that require a supermajority according to the law director. I guess you said 6 votes, right? That would be number 7. I think a lot of people haven't really been aware of this. Construct a sidewalk along the entire property line adjacent to Stimson Avenue right-of-way. 9, execute and record with the Athens County Recorder an access agreement between the owner and the Athens Red Cross in order to maintain the existing established routes of vehicular traffic. 10, develop an emergency evacuation plan and submit it for review and approval by the Athens City Fire Chief after consultation with the Athens County Emergency Management Agency. And then the last 2 that were amended, 17, there shall be no activity related to site development that could cause adverse impact to the existing bike path. And 18, there shall be constructed and maintained barriers or fences approved by the Athens City Safety Service Director along the existing drainage way and ditches that could be considered an attractive nuisance. Okay? But I just want to make sure everyone was aware that there are some that require that vote of 6 people, because they were not, I mean, in the absence of a site plan, we made an effort to try and get some things that the neighbors wanted into this, just to review that. So 013305, I have a number of people I've asked you to sign up, because last time we missed out on some people's names, and so I have quite a few people who have signed up, and I'm going to ask you to restrict yourself to 3 minutes, and to help you with that, Dale will be keeping time, and I have a 1 and a 0, and I'll get Paul to have a hook. And so it's very important, actually. I know you might, we would like to hear anything new that people have to say. New. I think we've heard most of it several times, but that's at least the opinion of several of us. Okay, so the first person we will call forward is Mrs. Gustafson.
I know I have to come over here.
You certainly do.
I'm Carol Gustafson. I live at 14 Utah Place, and I've lived in Athens since World War II. So I know what it was like when there weren't green trees anywhere. My husband and I remarked about how the forest grew up right while we lived here. And it's amazing what happened. I'm an environmentalist, I always have been, and I trust Bob Eichenberger when he says there's no threat of flood. I know there isn't, because I took pictures last January over that whole area. I've checked it out. We've suffered a lot. I don't want to go over 3 minutes. And I'm sorry Gary doesn't want it voted on tonight. I'm sick and tired of the delay, and I personally don't know why an ethics committee had to go look into this. I mean, the university is the biggest employer in the area, so how is anything ever going to be accomplished if you're going to rule out people with vested interests? The people that threw this monkey wrench in it have their own interests. Weren't they lucky to find something like that? I never could, all the things that I've opposed over the years, like children's services behind me, the highway behind me. Children's Services took part of our land to put their sewer pipes through. There was nothing we could ever do about it. Elmer Jones took away all our green area across the street, and so they're lucky they found something, and and I just think this is a very good plan. I don't have much hope that I'm going to live long enough to be able to use it, but I can see the handwriting on the wall. I've had 2 cancer surgeries in 5 years, so I'll probably miss out, but I'd like other people to have the opportunity to live in Athens. And I like neighborhoods. I just think it's a good plan. I've studied it, and I'd like to see it. I hate to keep seeing these delays. Let's do something and get something done, and not keep nitpicking. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen? Yeah. No, he just stood up to see what was going on.
I'm Norman Cohn. I live at 33 Graham Drive. I've lived in Athens with my wife for nearly 50 years, amazing though that may be. And I've written my prepared remarks so that I would maintain some degree of decorum and not offend anybody. But I'm going to start with my last statement, which says, in response to Mr. Hunter and others who commented, and I would support what Carol Gustafson has said, 2 facts regarding the Ethics Commission. 1, there is no code that prevents a council vote when there is an Ethics Commission challenge. And 2, the Ethics Commission does not rule retroactively. Thus, if council passes this ordinance, the commission cannot undo it or change it. Our children, all 3 of our children grew up here, went to all of the public schools here through Athens High School. And we want to stay here. We've had opportunities to leave over the many years we've been here, but we've chosen to stay here because we have a wonderful support group in many of you who are here. And we love the conveniences and the beauty and the amenities that are available in this community, thanks in large measure to the city councils of Athens that have been in operation for many years. I may run over time, but I'm going to introduce a couple of things that are not in my speech, and that is, it's very exciting for me to be here. One of the first events or issues in which I was involved many years ago, over 40 years ago, was when the Athens City Council at the time had proposed an obscenity ordinance. They wanted to exert censorship of things that were sold and viewed in Athens. I was on a committee that was against that ordinance. And members of that committee were largely people who were only Athens members. They were not university people. They were members of the Athens community, the old Athens community, which still exists, thank God. And the second event with the Athens City Council that stands out in my head is when my marvelous wife was on City Council, and the City Council was discussing anti-discrimination ordinance. And she spoke for anti-discrimination. And when she went out to the parking lot, on the cars, on the windshields of all the cars, there was a little statement that said, "And who is the lesbian on City Council?" Well, she was the only woman other than the woman who was against the ordinance. So my wife was ruled as a lesbian, and friends of ours from Columbus thought I was probably the most broad-minded man in Athens. Pat Light pointed out in her letter to the Messenger about this, that without this residential center, some of Athens' most creative and productive citizens would no longer be able to contribute to this community. Many have already moved to other cities that have such centers. Many of these people contributed to the richness and vitality of the area. Pat Light also said that council should not be swayed and intimidated by a very vocal but small group who may someday grow old, God forbid, and discover their own need for such a retirement center. Thinking only of the financial elements of such a center, Warren Reiniger, in writing to the newspapers, noted that this could be enough justifications for its approval. Tax income, patronage of the local businesses, and the fact that this older group is especially good as voters with their high turnout and their loyalty to the community, which is very important. Athens, including City Council, should be proud that this is such an attractive place to live. Council has made major contributions to that fact over these many years, this council included. NCR, NRC? Anyway, the company that wants to build the center has made significant efforts to satisfy our community, including their contribution to a playground adjacent to this CCRC and negotiation for the use of a conservancy piece across the river for additional recreational use. That's pretty damn good. Well, now I've got my section that says, finally, Edward R. Murrow said many years ago, and what reminded me of this was that we went to see this wonderful film, Good Night and Good Luck, just recently in Athens, and I advise you all to go see it. He said, "We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear of one another." And I thank you very much, except I have one more story, and that is, we were talking with a local resident today whose family came to Athens in 1790, and they had to live in a tree, probably 2 trees, at the time, and this is the truth. And he said, "Is that my fate? Is that what my fate's going to be? I'm going to wind up living in a tree?" Please, be kind to us all. Thank you.
And next we have Mr. Tucker. Mr. Tucker. Joe Tucker, you're next.
Good evening, I'm Joseph Tucker. I reside at 169 Longview Heights, Athens, Ohio. My wife and I have lived here, if this is relevant, 40-plus years. But my point is that I will be brief, hopefully mercifully brief and to the point. I strongly urge this council to complete the process of approving a CCRC for Athens this year. The amount of time and effort spent by the Planning Commission, council, the developer, and the citizens on both sides of this issue is considerable. Those of us in supporting this center believe that the community deserves a final vote this year. This conflict has gone on entirely too long. I understand that the law director, as we heard tonight, has recommended that council not give the pending ordinances a final reading. The reason being that his request to the Ohio Ethics Commission for a ruling on whether 4 members of City Council have a conflict of interest in this issue because they are either employed by the university or are a student. I understand now that the commission will only be reviewing the 3 employees. I fail to see actually how any of these individuals have a remote conflict of interest, but obviously that is not my decision to make, unfortunately. I understand that council has on occasion, however, in the past, voted on issues when the law director has recommended against such action. I am sure council does not make such decisions lightly, nor should they. But if a majority of council believes the issue is important enough to the community, and I truly believe you do, then a final vote is warranted this year, despite the pending request. As Norm said earlier, we also know that when the commission acts, that its decisions are not retroactive. Therefore, this council could act knowing that its decision, if it is approved, will not be countermanded by the commission. So those of us here tonight who strongly support this almost plead for council to act this year to approve this center. Thank you.
The next speaker is John Jones, please.
Good evening. My name is John Jones. I live at 74 Elmwood Place. I've followed the efforts of the Community Retirement Center committee meetings, council meetings for the last several months. The point has been made over and over that a community retirement center is wanted and needed. My advice is to approve it or disallow it. I'm upset the fact that our law director has said we have to wait till the third reading before we can hear from the Ethics Committee. This is a stranglehold on this particular council, and if we wait, it will probably go over to the next council, and it will be several more months before anything is done. I urge you to vote on this present council for this community retirement facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Margaret Topping, please.
My name is Margaret Topping. I live at 178 Longview Heights Road. We've lived here 36 years. And I wanted to comment that Joe Tucker was also on council. He didn't tell you that for quite a while. He contributed a lot to the city. This is really kind of a statement of review and to clear up a lot of misconceptions and confusion. It does repeat some of the things that have been said. But I am making this on behalf of our board for the CCRC for Athens. We really appreciate your having the second reading of both of our ordinances tonight. But as you are aware, the second reading is totally meaningless unless we have the assurance that we will also be on the agenda for a third reading and actually vote on both of these ordinances by the year end. We had been promised a special meeting if necessary to accomplish this, and this is a plea to have you grant us that promise of a third reading and an up or down vote as soon as possible. I ask this with the supporting vote of our board, as I mentioned, of NCR, of favorable editorials from both papers, and the multitude of supporters that have emailed and spoken to us, some of whom have graciously come tonight, in spite of Christmas and vacations and everything that's going on. NCR and our members have now worked for 4 years, almost 2 years with the city and the council. We've come to endless meetings, so have you, met the criteria required, spent considerable money to produce additional data and surveys, and are ready to go forward. We think we deserve a vote on this project. Otherwise, as some of you know, we must start the process all over with a new council, new ordinance, and still wait for the actual ruling from the Ethics Commission. We know that there is an appeal out there to the Ethics Commission, which has been mentioned several times tonight, but there is no code section, as Norm said, that prevents a council member from voting and which stops the action of council. In addition, we don't know when the commission will rule or whether they will give a definitive ruling when they do rule. They're not known for doing that. And they have indicated to NCR that even a staff opinion this year is unlikely because of the time frame. Now, Gary has indicated otherwise. But what they also said was that there really won't be an actual ruling until the commission meets in January. We do know that the Ethics Commission never rules retroactively, which was also mentioned. That is hugely important. This means that if it's passed, they cannot go back and refute it in any way, and they never have. And that they have stated that they're going to only consider the OU employees as a group, regardless of their job responsibilities. They will not consider students, so it wouldn't matter what you did for the university. They're going to consider it as whether or not you're a council member that isn't paid by the university. We also realize that you have been advised by the law director not to vote, and I believe the reason given was that Dale could be sued for conflict of interest. But we have always had OU employees on council. There have been 4 or 5 challenges. If you look back, I was an auditor in the 70s. 4 or 5 challenges over the years, none of which have resulted in conflict of interest. None of the other floodplain leases from the university have been challenged that I'm aware of by a conflict of interest. A ruling now by the commission that all Ohio University employees could not vote on any university-related issue would profoundly change the way we do business in the city of Athens, and for that matter, in some of the other university communities. It would be totally ridiculous. There never is a perfect world that is 100% sure. Please examine your conscience and have the courage to give us the opportunity of a vote. Anything less, in our view, is really discrimination against us as older people. Thank you very much.
Where's Jerry? Yeah? Good. I try to say her last name, but I can't remember how it goes.
Jerry Kwiat, National Church Residences. You asked for new things. I apologize. I'll keep it to 60 seconds, but there isn't a lot new.
Okay.
It's probably a poor attempt at humor, but given the 7-0 vote on the budget and the fact that some 25 to 30 people have signed up to speak this evening, it might have been more effective if we had simply tried to get this on as a rider to your budget, but
This is not Congress. Happened really in Alaska. And more willing.
Sometimes we've talked about the fact that this project has been 9 months. Some have talked about a year. But I recall in the first week of February getting out of the car at Bristol Village with Tom Slemmer as he was trying to recruit me away from the Masonic home. And one of his last comments to me is, we think we have an opportunity to maybe work with Ohio University on a retirement center. I can tell you that was a major consideration. Me accepting the position, it was a tremendous opportunity, and I hope that we can still make it happen. We consider it an honor as NCR to have been selected by the CCRC committee here to work on this project. It's been a privilege to consider the relationship with Ohio University. We simply want to reiterate that we are ready to proceed pending approval by this council. No, we really don't have any new issues to bring up this evening. We too would ask for a resolution this year. Ultimately, what we're looking for simply is an up or down vote. And I guess I would say that you speak for the citizens of Athens, whether it's 4-3 against or 7-0 against. If it's against, NCR will move on to other projects. We certainly would love to work on this project and would hope that whether the vote is 4-3 or 7-0 in favor, that we'd have that opportunity. Thank you.
The next person is Jean Emerald.
Gene Emerald, 187 North Congress. I don't know if it's procedurally appropriate, but I would like to understand what Nancy Bain mentioned before about supermajority. I don't understand that. If you could explain that at some point.
After council, or when we go on a recess, I'll show you.
Great. And how it affects this particular project.
Right.
I don't want to spend a lot of time. One of the things I hear a lot is that a small minority of people are trying to just slow this process down. It's been clear to me that it's been NCR that has been slowing the process down. They wouldn't talk to the community at first, and they still won't come up with a plan. And that in itself sets a precedent for other projects that also don't want to come up with a plan before they, yes, it's going to cost you money. That's the price you have to pay to do business in Athens, Ohio, as far as I'm concerned. You have to put up the money to make the plan, present it, and then we can vote on it. If we don't have a plan, we can't vote on it. How can people vote on something? It's irresponsible of council, I think, to vote on something that they don't have in front of them. So, and I'm I'm glad that there's been a lot of amendments, because in place of the fact there's been no plan. But I think that's the only resort, that's the only thing that the council could do in light of the fact there isn't any plan. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have George Berardi. Let's see if I said it right this time. It's the third time. Finally get it right, George.
Well, I think the plans were submitted, and I'm not quite sure I remember being contacted, either NCR or ourselves, about public hearings other than the ones that we've attended. Through this process, there have been a number of technical issues and emotional issues expressed on behalf of the immediate neighborhood. The technical issues can be resolved in the normal course of design and approvals through local and state jurisdiction for permitting. Permitting is the key to all of this. We don't submit a final plan that isn't acceptable to everyone. We can't get a permit. We cannot build, whether it's Athens, whether it's Columbus, whether it's anywhere in the state of Ohio or anywhere in the US of A. It seems to me that the emotional arguments in the past have boiled down to, or can be boiled down to, space divided along the lines of generations. I've heard so many times put it somewhere else. Move the seniors to the back row effectively. I don't want to spend too much time because Mr. Cohn did such a wonderful job, and I want to give him my last 2 minutes, but I just wanted to say simply that seniors have as many rights as anyone in this community to this property. They are the ones who built Athens. I think you've heard that, and you know that. Extending those opportunities for the quiet enjoyment, quiet and peaceful enjoyment to all is what they've done for you. We have addressed evacuation plans. We've committed to them. We have addressed bike path resolution. We've committed to that. We've addressed fences. We've addressed Red Cross access. We've addressed sidewalks along Stimson. We've addressed landscaping changes. We've addressed floodwaters. We've addressed buffers. I know that every time we've addressed them, somebody says, we don't believe you.
Yeah.
I don't know what more we can say other than just to commit to doing those things, and I go back and recite that first paragraph that I read with regard to permits. Permits are a key to everything. We don't comply in any respect to anything that's on the documents that are promised, be they drawings or other commitments, and we can't proceed.
Thank you. Next, we have Patricia Lockman.
I'm Patricia Lockman, and I'm from 156 Mill Street in Athens. I've lived here for 27 years now. My neighborhood, as far as a neighborhood goes, died. There were many things that happened, but basically the need to become a bedroom for the university took the place of the need to be a neighborhood. I'm also concerned about the East Side neighborhood. They are people with young children, elementary school. They need places to play. They need places to be involved in green space. In my neighborhood, there are no more birds. There's just cement. There are very few trees. If that neighborhood in the East Side becomes untenable for families and they leave, I don't think the seniors are going to enjoy living amongst the party atmosphere that I live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jennifer Simon.
Jennifer Simon, I'm here today representing the Chamber of Commerce, 449 East State Street. It's all been said before. I know that council, you must be tired. I know that the folks from NCR are tired. I know that the CCRC committee is tired. Quite frankly, I would say that a number of the residents of the Near East Side are probably tired, whether they're for the project or against the project. And that's why it seems so important that council move forward. We're within 2 weeks of the end of the year. We're within 2 weeks of needing a decision on this project. You know, it was brought up about the neighborhoods being a place for families and children, and I made this comment before. I think the neighborhood needs to be a place for all people, children, elderly, families, and we cannot discriminate between one or the other, and I'm not using that term in a racial way or in another way, but we cannot discriminate about who lives in what community. You know, I worked for the state for a number of years and went through some ethics commission pieces, and I can tell you that they're very, very, very slow. And so slow, I believe that in this case, an opinion most likely would not come until January or February. So while everyone is tired of hearing and making the same comments over and over again, as we have over the last year or two, waiting for the Ethics Commission will cause this proposal to be put off for yet another year. Another year of both sides making the same arguments over and over again. And I know that Gary has said that he doesn't think that council should go ahead and vote before the Ethics Commission ruling comes out because of a risk of lawsuits. Well, council has gone against, quite frankly, the law director in times before, and I would call the attention of the wellhead protection ordinance discussion when council wanted to move forward, and Mr. Hunter, you know, was giving advice not to do so in order to have the process be one that was inclusive. So I ask you, members of council, to vote on this ordinance for the sake of everybody involved, to give this the third reading. Whether it's an up vote or a down vote, the thing needs to be decided now. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mark Lehman.
Hello, my name is Mark Lehman. I live at 84 South May in Athens. I've heard a lot of emotional appeals and the discrimination card played, and I represent family with small children in that neighborhood. I have 3 children myself. I'm not going to play either of those cards, and I encourage council to think about reasoned arguments about the facts that are on the table, and we're not saying we don't want old people in the neighborhood. We have a lot of old people in the neighborhood, and it's a great thing. Has nothing to do with that. You had a earlier ordinance, and it was something about a proper commensurate shape and size of development, and that's an issue. And we've got our neighborhood on that side of Stimson Avenue that's houses, mostly single family. We're single family and we're houses. That's at risk of becoming a Mill Street kind of a neighborhood. And what we want is, if this thing's going to happen, if you want to put a retirement center there, make it of commensurate shape and size, not this massive thing that takes up all that green space. Okay, so you can say, well, you can do whatever they want, that's their land. Okay, that's right. Oh, you can probably do whatever they want. But this time, they need our city acre of right-of-way to get it done, right? Well, at least cut us a decent deal. At least cut us a decent deal, right? If we're going to give them an acre of right-of-way, at least give us an acre for the park. We're getting a third of an acre, maybe, that's not even in writing. And if you don't act before 2006, you may not get the third of an acre, right? Well, I don't call that everything being in writing and being upfront. That's what we don't trust. Put it in writing. Give us a decent deal, City Council. Give us a decent deal. And I call again for the thing to go back and work with OU. Let's get together with the families in the neighborhood, with all the parties, and make a different new plan that represents the population at large. The ethics thing, I think it's a lot about politics. You may have the votes to get it through in 2005, you don't in 2006. Beside all of that, who might be better off in 2006 and who might not? I called again for Mr. Tamke to recuse himself. Faculty have tenure to protect themselves so they can speak and talk independently. Unions protect hourly workers. And the students have started revolts and felt free to buck universities. Asking a university administrator to vote in city government about whether the university administration should get concessions, it has nothing to do with ad hominem the man. I don't know him personally. It's just common sense that that looks like a conflict of interest. If we're going to let the Ohio Commission rule on it, then great, we'll go with it. But you can't just say, oh, let's just ignore that thing. I think it looks bad. Process counts. You're going to have to keep governing, right? You're going to have to keep taking care of these kind of issues. So let's do it in a way that looks like it's fully above board and nobody can complain afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Chris Pyle.
Hi, Chris Pyle, 80 South Shannon. I feel like NCR has held up this process. Like Mark said, put the promises in writing. I feel like, an acre for an acre, and I feel like City Council, you're the ones responsible to hold NCR accountable, so please, please do that. I do want to just say I think it's a shame that we have to bring bigotry into this as far as seniors go. It's really upsetting me. And I also want to say that I am a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and I wasn't represented by Ms. Simon. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Dee Dee Reif, please.
I'm Dee Dee Reif. I live at 5 Ridgeview, Athens. This may be new. I've lived in this community 10 years, so I have no credibility whatsoever to speak. I do want to add that I am a 5th-generation member of a community in a state far south of here that built a facility very similar to this in a site very similar, except we just didn't have a river. We have about 30 years of history to look at, and that's all I can offer you because I am an historian, always. This facility meant not only a lot, and still means a lot, to the older people who live there, because they get to stay in the place they love, they get to live with the people who are their friends. But it means so much to those of us who no longer live in the community. The point's probably been made, but I'm here to tell you that I would not be going to the home I love if we did not have that facility. Not only do I see my relatives in this facility, but I see my school teachers, I see the parents of my friends. It has become home for us who no longer live there, and it keeps us coming back. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Mel Hellitzer, please.
My name is Mel Hellitzer. I'm a professor at the Scripps School of Journalism, and I've been a resident of Athens since 1979. From the great speeches and remarks that have been made and your request that you be told anything new, I almost feel like saying, in conclusion. Except there are 2 points that I would like to urge. One is the green space is gone. There is no more green space. The university has indicated over and over again that they are prepared, if this land is reverted to their control, to put up facilities to an expanded university with more students, with more dorms, with more facilities for parking and housing and meals. The green space is gone. When I asked an administrator of the university, what plans did you have for this in case the land was reverted to you? He said, the master plan doesn't have any plans because we couldn't imagine that the council would turn down this offer. But if they did, we would welcome it. We need that space. The second point I'd like to point is that I had the opportunity to write a book 2 years ago. It's never too late to plant a tree. And I have a copy for each of you. And I scoured the country, mainland, Hawaii, and Canada, looking for seniors who were doing something in their retirement years. Now, we're not talking about a nursing home here. We're talking about a retirement center where people who would retire in their 60s are living until their 80s and their 90s. And they are still vital, they're still mentally active, and they still want to contribute to the area that they live in. And the amazing thing about our discovery was that of the 65 people listed in this book, 7 of them come from Athens. You do not appreciate the wonderful people that we have here, the wonderful people who want to stay here, people who are working to clean up our streams, people who are working with mentally challenged, teaching them photography so that they can be productive and proud, people who are retired history professors that dress up in Civil War uniforms and go to schools to teach them the things about this part of the country in the Civil War. These are the people who are begging you to give them the facilities that they want and the hospitality that they need. Hospitality is not to say to them, well, you can go to a facility 1 or 2 miles out of town. That's not hospitality. That is not even common sense. If I were to do this book over again, I would add 2 people who are here tonight. One of them is Colonel John Jones, the most decorated pilot in the Army Air Corps in World War II, who flew over 50 missions with a casualty rate of 50% to help us save our lives, and now he's asking for you to give him the dignity to live here in Athens. And I would also include the closest thing we have here to the Statue of Liberty, Margaret Topping. Who for 5 years has been saying, as it says on the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your huddled masses, yearning to be free. You have a choice, and you only have 2 choices. That area goes to the retirement community who want to add to the economy of this area 12 months a year. Or it goes to students who have a reputation for binge drinking, trashing neighborhoods, fighting with police, or burning couches in the middle of the street. The choice is yours, and that's the only choice you've got. When I came here from New York in 1979, in conclusion, I want to say, people said to me, that must be quite a culture shock to come from New York to Athens. It's not a culture shock. We love it here. But the thing I fear is that I came from New York, the city that never sleeps, to Athens, the city that never woke up. I think you have a choice, and I would like to see you make it tonight. I would like to see you make it unanimously. I would not want to be a member of this council and have my name put in the history books that I was against one of the great vital economic and social segments of our population. That's not emotion. That is business. And I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Now, David Ingram. David, you're on.
I should have told David Ingram, resident of 120 Morris Avenue in Athens. Got several things. I'll try and be brief. I'd like, first of all, to point out that Margaret Topping did meet with myself and members of NENA with NCR right at the beginning of this project. We did see what was going on. They did ask us for our opinions. I particularly mentioned to them that we would prefer the seniors to actually live in the community rather than in a large isolated block at the end of the street. During the comprehensive plan, of which I was a member of the steering committee, we heard overwhelming support for the retention of green space along the river corridor. That's something that I think is there in the record. As a resident of Morris Avenue, I'm concerned about access to the bicycle path once this development is put in place, particularly if you revoke the access that we currently have to that bicycle path. We'll then have to go along Stimson Avenue, where there is currently no sidewalk, and I think you may be dealing with that, but that is a concern that we've got. Finally, I'd like to thank the council members, particularly Dale Tamke. I think he does a great job on council, along with many of the other people from the university who contribute greatly to this community. There is a concern, though, as a taxpayer, that if we are to face, or you are to face, a legal challenge, we as taxpayers are going to have to foot that bill. I was surprised that this question of whether members of the university can sit on council and vote on matters that are of benefit to the university had never been addressed before. I would have thought it was an obvious question that should have been addressed. The university has said it expects to benefit from this development by having faculty and staff able to retire into the community, a laudable goal, so that they can further contribute to the university. That's a clear benefit. And that is immediately then casts the shadow of appearance of conflict of interest. And that's what concerns me. I don't believe that any of the members of council who are working for the university are particularly conflicted or underhand or anything like that. In fact, I hope you do vote the vote of thanks you've got on your agenda at the end for Dale Tamke. I think he does a great job. But I'm concerned about the appearance of conflict of interest. I'm concerned that someone may come along and try and instigate a legal challenge, which will finish up with the taxpayers footing a big legal bill. And that's my concern in this at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Chris Fall.
My name's Chris Fall, and I'm 35 Morris Avenue. And I've talked about process before this evening. From the very start of this process with the Planning Commission, you have had issues raised time and time again about conflict of interest. I raised it with some of the Planning Commission members when in public meeting they said, let's get this voted on, I'd like to live in it. That's an appearance of a conflict of interest. That's not good for the process of planning and development for all of Athens. It does not matter whether you like this project, like seniors, like families, like dogs, like Frisbee. The process of planning and development permitting in this town affects everybody. It affects people on the south side, on the west side. It affects everybody. Council needs to make legitimate recommendations and votes. If council goes ahead and votes on this, as many people are pressuring council to do, it may not be completely undone by the commission, the Ethics Commission's decision, because as people have said, they don't do things retroactively. But that won't matter to the people of Athens. It will look like an illegitimate vote, because there is this issue of conflict of interest. The people who are concerned about this project are not the only ones who have asked members of council about their conflict of interest. I know supporters have asked certain members of council about it. It's a legitimate concern, so legitimate and so worrying to some people, they felt the third party had to look at it. The legitimacy of the decisions that are made by you will affect all the other projects that are coming down. I already have heard from some developing and interaction, is that what are the people from Campus Edgeway want? Are they want not to put in final platted plans? Because NCR was allowed not to do that, though it's a normal thing you do. Process is important. We have a lot of very large-scale projects coming down the pipeline for this city. It doesn't matter whether you support this or not support it. The process is going to affect those things in the future. And that will affect every single person in Athens, whether you're old or whether you've just moved here or whether you were born here. So I suggest that you seriously look at the legitimacy and the legality and the appearance of this process, because in the future it's going to come back and either haunt you and haunt all of Athens, or you're going to be held up and said, they did the right thing. Thank you.
Okay, next we have thank you, Muriel Grimm. One more after this.
Muriel Grimm, 24 Canterbury, and I don't quite fit the profile of the people who have found objections to this. I live on the south side and I'm old. But there are problems, as Chris just pointed out, with process that really worry me. That you have had to make that list of recommendations that were not made by the Planning Commission suggests that this arrived at council before it should have. The Planning Commission should have made those recommendations. That you are going ahead now with a very confusing vote, needing a supermajority to make those changes. This is not good government. Oh, and by the way, I've only lived here 5 years, which means I've had a chance to experience a lot of different governments in a lot of different places. And I can recognize serious problems when I see them, and I see them here. I also see a serious problem with giving up that acre of right-of-way. It has potential use for the city in the future. It should not just be dismissed because it happens to be in the way of these plans. So I ask you, please, and one more thing, not extending this to the next council. Why not? If it's such a marvelous project with everything in place, surely the next council will see it just as well as this council. So I ask you, please, get this right. Don't rush it through just because you're being accused of being thinking poorly or doing bad things for elderly people. I'm in the next wave. I'm elderly. I know what it's going to be like, and I want it right when it's my turn.
Thank you. Last person on the list is Paige Allist.
Well, since I'm the last person on the list, I guess I'll be really brief. I'm Paige Allist, and I live at 24 Cable Lane. Wow. In the period of time that I've been working with the CCRC for Athens committee, I've had a baby who's now 20 months old. We've been talking about this for a long, long time. It's time to vote. And if you want to stall, then admit you want to stall. If you want to vote, vote. Let's vote. We've waited a long time. Thanks.
Okay, so now we're at the point of closing down the public input. Does anyone on council wish to talk now? It's second reading that we've just had.
I have some comments.
Yes?
First of all, I'd like to thank the law director, ask the law director. There have been a lot of comments about what would happen if council voted before a ruling is made. And I wonder if you could address that a little bit, because I frankly don't know. And I'd like your specific opinion on that.
Of course, it's only my opinion, and in my opinion, the Ethics Commission would not go back retroactively to attempt to undo council's vote on the project. However, I do feel that individual council members that would choose to vote that have the issue of conflict of interest raised against them prior to that vote are at risk for a complaint being filed against them at the Ethics Commission that they have violated the ethics law by voting if the Ethics Commission comes back with a decision that they have a conflict of interest. And they have personal issues that I do not really feel comfortable in subjecting them to. I can appreciate the comments by members of the audience that move the project forward. The project may well move forward, but my concern is the welfare and the best interest of council members individually in this situation, and that's why I made the recommendation that I made.
Okay. And, I mean, was suggested that the ideal is that we have a special meeting so that we can address this. I feel very strongly, and have expressed it to the rest of the council, that this is an issue that this council should vote on. We have 7 people who have worked very hard to understand the entire issue, and with 2 new people coming on council, obviously, they would have to repeat that entire process. Also, we have worked through a process of amending and adding conditions with the idea that these were the things that were of concern. And it's those things, I would assume, would disappear if we had to start the process again in the new year, that you don't take those...
That's not necessarily correct,
Okay.
Carol. The ordinance could be reintroduced exactly in the same form that it would die in. And the public needs to be aware that ordinances don't necessarily die at the end of every year, but in the years in which there's an elected council coming on, a new council coming on, they do have to complete the business in that end of that particular year, unless it's an ongoing contract, and then it could be acted on the next year. So it would be my impression that you could reintroduce the ordinance exactly in the same format that it's in.
Okay.
You need to also be aware that there is a statute in Ohio for statutory cities that requires that there be an affirmative vote of the majority of council to pass an ordinance, which would be 4 votes. So if members take my recommendation and you choose to act and step aside because they have a possibility of a conflict of interest, you would only have 3 council people left. And under the statutes, Ohio would not be enough to adopt the ordinance. And there's a further requirement in this particular ordinance that council adopted, and it's in the revised code also, on amending the recommendations of the Planning Commission
Right.
require the supermajority. And you would have to have that to amend it. And I've allowed certain of those recommendations to flow because they're consistent with what the Planning Commission, in my opinion, issued to go with the majority. Others are requiring a supermajority. Because of all of that confusion in the situation, I think council and the public is best served by waiting for the decision of the Ethics Commission. Having said that, I only make recommendations.
Right.
Council can do what council chooses to do.
Right. And I do think that it's fair to say that, obviously, you could say that the people in favor of the issue see 4 possible votes and therefore want to vote, while the reverse is true as well, that people who are not sure the votes would rather take their chances with new people on council, and I understand that, but I feel from a responsibility standpoint, and I was asked this many times during the election, and my answer was always the same. It is our responsibility as this council. And the other thing that has been going through my mind is there's a difference between interest in a project and a conflict of interest. You know, we haven't eliminated everybody that's old, everybody that lives in any particular neighborhood. That's not the way it works. And there's been a lot of that type of discussion, like because somebody might eventually live in such a facility that it might be considered conflict of interest. I don't know how the Ethics Commission will vote, obviously, or rule. I have no idea. But I do think that everybody needs to take the opportunity to respect the opinions of all, and I find it upsetting that perhaps the vote has been taken away from City Council.
One other thing I'd like to clarify, Carol, and I appreciate your comments, is that I don't view this as necessarily something that has to be ruled on by the Ethics Commission. The Ethics Commission rules on complaints that are filed. Okay. Requests for opinions are issued by the legal staff at the Ethics Commission, and only go to the Ethics Commission if the legal staff feels that it's something that is a change of direction for the Ethics Commission, and they need to have a ruling from the Ethics Commission. Certainly, my conversations with the Chief Legal Counsel for the Ethics Commission is that she, at the time I talked with her, felt that they would be able to do an opinion without going to the full Ethics Commission. Certainly, they are under a tremendous amount of encouragement from my office to have a decision out this year sometime.
Thank you for the clarifications and for your efforts.
Other people wishing to speak in this? Paul?
More questions for Gary. In terms of supermajority, if a supermajority does not exist, the conditions fall away. Do we vote on conditions one by one? Is it the entire ordinance, as part of the ordinance?
No, Paul. As I indicated at the earlier meeting, which I addressed each one of those conditions, it's my opinion that if the ordinance is, you vote on the ordinance, if it's adopted by majority vote of all of council, 4 votes, at least 4 votes, but does not reach the supermajority status, those items that require the supermajority simply fall off the ordinance, and the rest of them are there.
Okay.
Debbie?
May I ask a further clarification on that? You've said that you give advice to council, and council can decide what to do with that. And I think that some of us read that differently and have been a little bit confused by that section of the subdivision regs, which I believe is modeled on what Ohio Revised Code states, and understood that if the ordinance was brought forward, having been modified from the Planning Commission recommendation, that it requires a 3/4 majority to pass. And I thought, reading that it meant the ordinance, the whole ordinance, required a 3/4 majority to pass. And I don't know how we wrestle with a question like that.
Well, that's not a question for council. As far as I make recommendations and as to procedure and what you follow, and you're free to do what you think is in your best interest. So when I make a recommendation that you hold off your vote, you're free to go ahead and have a vote. You're not free to interpret the ordinance or the state law. That falls within the domain of my office. So when I made the interpretation, that is in fact binding on you.
It's getting complicated here. Anybody on this side? Well, Jim?
I'll just respond by reiterating my opinion that as a member of council, I think our responsibility to council and to individual members of the council at this point is to follow the law director's advice. We have some indication that an opinion will be coming within the next 2 weeks, and at that point we would make a decision on what to do. Now, Mr. Hunter, I had heard some discussion at some point that this legal person from the Ethics Commission had indicated that her opinion thought that then the vote just kind of devolved to whomever was left, and a majority of them would rule. Is that the case, or a possibility, or?
The discussion I had with Jennifer Harden, the Chief Legal Counsel for the Ohio Ethics Commission, pointed out to her that we have possibly 4 council people with an allegation of conflict of interest against them. If all 4 are ruled to have a conflict, then I don't have the 4 votes necessary for passage of an ordinance, and I would need the Ethics Commission to address that issue also. Her indication back to me at that time was that that issue has been decided, she believes, by a Court of Appeals decision in the state of Ohio, in which the remaining members of council would only need a majority of the remaining members of council. I asked her if that Court of Appeals decision was out of the 4th District Court of Appeals, which is in fact the Court of Appeals that's applicable to Athens County, and she said no, it was not. And I told her that, in my opinion, that would not be controlling, because it's not a Court of Appeals decision for Athens County, and therefore the Ethics Commission would at least have to attempt to address that. In my opinion, if the Ethics Commission rules that a sufficient number of council people have a conflict that we fall below being able to get 4 votes, we have a real issue that is probably going to end up in court.
Either way.
Either way.
Either way. Any other comments from council? Well, hearing none, I'll have a 5-minute recess to clear the room if people would like to go, and we'll go on to the next reading then.
That's right, the mayor is
All right, we are back in session after a 5-minute break, and now we're going to read O-13405, an ordinance amending ordinance O-6604 to increase sewer rates in accordance with the Athens City Code and declaring an emergency. I would like to move to consider O-13405 under suspension of the rules.
Second.
We would like to suspend the rules because we would like these to take effect the 1st of January. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, I move adoption of O-13405.
Second.
O-13405 puts in a 3% increase. Maybe we'll put in another one. I'd like some attention to I&I. Maybe someone else will be in charge of this next time. I keep beating the I&I drum, hoping we don't have to increase another part of the sewer plant because we have so much inflow and infiltration. That's why there's not we'll continue doing it forever. I sometimes think financial efforts end up being effective arguments. That's my argument, and I'm sticking to it. Anyone else have a comment on 13405?
Could be part of Athens.
Oh, yes, okay. All right, all those in favor of 13405 say aye.
Aye.
13505, the ordinance passes 7-0. 13505, an ordinance amending the 2005 appropriation ordinance. Mr. Tamke.
Move the consideration of 13505 under suspension.
Second.
The reason for the suspension is that this is a pass-through for an agency fund. We'd like to be able to continue the lakefront service through this period and do it uninterrupted. This is our last meeting of the year.
Good. All right. All those in favor of suspending the rules?
Aye.
Opposed? The rules are suspended, 7-0.
Thank you. Move adoption of 13505.
Second.
There was a second, thank you. I didn't hear it. This is allocate $65,000 from the Transportation Assistance Fund. This is a pass-through. We serve as the agent for this. This funds the lakefront bus, which is a good service, which you'd like to continue.
Kathy?
Well, I just wanted to point out that this amount, because this money comes in at the end of the year, that last year we passed an ordinance for prior year, early this year, to pay a prior year bill and about $65,000 for transportation. But this year we caught it, so we're getting it done.
Little by little and day by day.
It's not to say there won't be some prior year bills, but we won't have this one.
One less.
Okay, other comments on 13505?
For that.
Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 13505 passes 7-0. Ordinances for first reading, 13506, an ordinance amending the 2005 appropriation ordinance. Dale still is doing it. Dale.
Move to consider 13605 under suspension.
Second.
Thank you. There are several items in here that we'd like to take care of. The primary one is in Section 3, where we made a promise that we were going to pay the CAP fund back out of the sewer fund. This is where we make good on the promise. So it would be good to pass this tonight so we can be in compliance with what we've said we're going to do to the auditors.
Okay, so that is under, did we vote for suspension? I lost it.
That is for
No.
suspension.
That was for suspension.
That was suspension.
Okay. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The rules are suspended. Mr. Tamke.
Thank you. Move adoption of 13605.
Second.
There are several things happening in addition to the item I pointed out in Section 3. In Section 1, we are allocating an amount, $54,754.24. That's the balance what we owe to the school district as a result that we owe under the TIF. There is some still dollars flowing to the school district, and that's the payment to that. The other items in the 100 class are wage adjustments that the auditors advised me where we have had interns on the staff, and this will allow us to fulfill our obligations to pay the interns. If you recall, in the staffing ordinance, interns are slotted at a range, and we make an estimate of what we believe we're going to need to fund those, and here we're sort of cleaning up the books and getting that squared away at the end. The $2 is a prior year refund, and it just serves to remind us that in the view of the state auditor, there's no such thing as materiality. Everything is material to the state auditor, even $2.
It's actually $1.96.
It's $1. All right, we'll be looking for the 4 cents in the carry forward in the next year.
Could you, just for a moment, tell me, or I mean, just for information, since we're talking about the ordinance now?
Yes.
What, where are these internship adjustments primarily taking place?
I will ask the auditor to fill in
Where?
the blanks.
Which fund under general?
Oh, in the mayor's office and internal service fund. There's one that works in the mayor's office and one for Beverly Henderson, one.
And
That's where they are. There's 101, 101, and 101, 120.
So are we paying $17,000 for 1 year for some of these people?
No, the other one, no, they're not all out of that. Let me go back to this.
Well, I mean, it just seems like the playing field should be very even. If it's, 10,000 for an intern, it should be 10,000 for an intern.
Well, what happens is, we don't often, I don't know that they've ever had interns in there as regularly as they have, full-time, and, a lot of this came up when Charlene Moeller left after I started in office a little over a year ago, and Bridget started working, and a position was eliminated in the mayor's office. If you remember, Melissa took Charlene's position, and, so that, there was a position eliminated, and I think the interns put in more hours than what they did, than what, they thought they would when they budgeted.
I guess I'm, at the risk of being obnoxious, I just wanted to know if we are running higher paid interns in some offices than others.
Oh, no, the pay range is still, pretty low for that, their hourly wage. And that's not to say that all of that is due to that. Some could be, there could be some overtime in the mayor's office from Halloween and whatever. These are actually very small amounts. When I went back last year and saw the list of appropriations that was sent in for my office last year, it was probably 3 or 4 times longer than this.
It's a little by little,
Our budget is a
better and
lot
better.
closer than it was. That's not to say I hope I don't all of a sudden find a lot of things come January, but no, we had a much longer list of adjustments, especially for wage and earnings. Overtime and, changes in positions, it's just hard. The mayor budgets them very close, as well he should. And so the end of the year, I guess I thought these weren't bad at all. And it's the same thing at the community center. That's another position. I think that probably has to do with Emily Prince coming on.
Okay.
That wasn't a note.
Yeah.
All right,
I should have said that.
I'm willing to concede. I'm just thinking that regular, I mean, if they are workers for us, they should be having benefits, or, I mean, an intern is an intern. I just don't think we should be having full-time. But anyway, that's for another time.
Sure.
Let's go on.
But I would just only say that I think it's not I'd say it's not an unusual outcome when you reduce the permanent staff, the workload doesn't abate. And so somebody's got to get the work done. When I call there, I know the phone is often answered by someone I think is probably an intern. When I call the mayor's office, safety service director's office. Now, I'm not saying
Absolutely.
that's
And the one
what's going on,
intern,
but it's not an unusual outcome.
yeah, we have positions for interns in my office, but they come and go, and you go for months without interns, and then you pick somebody up, and, they might work full-time in the summer or over the break like now, or they might not. And I know that the one intern in the mayor's office started the year before this and has been a very regular employee, very dependable, and is not getting paid any more than any other interns anywhere else. She's just been regular and been there for over a year, been steady. Usually there's gaps in when you have a position like that.
I just want to make sure if they deserve benefits, that they get benefits. That's my main.
Well, that's a good point, but I think she's actually almost done now.
Okay.
But-
If an intern is an intern. Sorry I brought it up.
Sure, no, that's all right.
I think the key to what Kathy said, though, is that they're really paid on an hourly basis, correct? Up to 20 hours, and they're not allowed to go over that 20 hours. So they're in the part-time basis, but that's what would account for the odd amount rather than flat $10,000 chunks.
Right.
Which it would work out to if they fulfilled the full 20 hours for the whole time. But they don't necessarily do that, but that would account for the difference.
Right. Now, I'd be surprised if they average 20 hours a week for an entire year.
And for example, Emily Princess didn't start at the beginning of the year.
It's
So
30
that
hours, I think,
would
for
also
benefits.
account for the difference in...
I think it's 30 hours for benefits, Carol, not 20.
I know, that's what I said.
But most
that
interns
they-
are only allowed to work up to 20
Up
hours.
to
That's
20.
the way we have it set. So,
Okay.
and I, like I
Some in my
said,
office work more than 20, they just don't work more than 30.
Okay, but I think that for the most part, yeah.
Now we know I have a problem. Stop on.
Yeah.
Wait, yet another offense against us. I'm sorry, dear. All right, I'm sorry.
Over here, too. I've got little hash marks going.
Yeah. Be asking for more money to cover money.
Get in line.
It's your last chance.
All right, Dale, I'm through making trouble. Go ahead.
To adoption, isn't it?
She did, yeah, okay. Anybody else have a comment? Real or imagined? Okay, all those in favor of 13605, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance is adopted. 13705, an ordinance authorizing a stop-loss medical insurance contract with United Healthcare and declaring an emergency. Mr. Tampa?
Thank you, Madam President. Move to consider 13705 under suspension.
Second.
The reason for the suspension is in the interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Athens. We ought to have our stop-loss insurance in place on January the 1st to cover our employees.
Definitely.
We need to act tonight to make sure that that happens.
All right. Anybody else speaking on the issue of suspension? He did a nice job, didn't he? All right, all those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The rules are suspended, 7-0.
Move adoption of 13705.
second.
Thank you. This comes to us late, but it always comes to us late. This will, the effect of this ordinance will be two things. One is we will change the stop-loss carrier to a company called AIG Life Insurance. The reason for the change is that under the bids, or I guess I wouldn't call them bids, the quotes that were provided to the personnel director, that we can actually achieve a savings in the stop-loss coverage over what we paid this year. This will raise the deductible from $65,000 to $75,000. However, her analysis of the past few years has indicated that it is rare for us to reach, and this year we have not hit the stop-loss at all. And 2 years ago, we had a very modest advance. We hit the stop-loss a little bit, and in the year in between, we were into it a little bit more. It's the opinion of our third-party administrator that this carrier presented the best bid to us, and that's why it's before us now. It's before us late because the underwriters will not provide, they need to have all of the information from November before they will, the underwriters, for the people who are providing quotes, the underwriters will not provide us a good quote that they will live by until all of our November claims experience is in the book, in the book. So we're always in this last 2 weeks of December dealing with this. I received a memo from the personnel director on Tuesday of last week. So as much as we'd have liked to have had a committee meeting, we weren't able to do it. I had a conversation with the mayor today with the personnel director, and they are comfortable with this recommendation. I wish we would have had a committee meeting, but we're not having one, but this is before you is the best thinking of the administration.
Anybody else? Okay, so just to clarify, I thought we'd better say that we are self-insured up to $65,000, now it'll be up to $75,000, and that's what the stop-loss kicks in at $75,000, and we have an outside insurance carrier. What?
Per claim?
Per claim, yes. I just think it's really important to know that, since it sounds like we're talking in code.
Well, and I would just point out that we spent $302,700 on our stop-loss coverage this year. Next year, the quote is $244,710, which is about a $58,000 savings.
Good. Sherry, did you have something you wanted to say? No. Jim?
I had a question. The title of the ordinance says stop-loss medical insurance contract with United Healthcare, but then we're talking about AIG.
That's a clerical mistake.
Okay.
Thanks for pointing that out. United Healthcare is the company that we have had, the previous company.
You'd probably be happy.
They did, that company, just in case you're interested, did provide a bid, but they were in the $330,000 range. And that was after, they went up significantly, and Beverly actually went back to them and said, they went up more than that. They reduced their quote a little bit, and she sort of challenged them on it, but it was still a significant increase for us.
Other comments? Carol?
Just one. I'm glad we went through this process, if it looks like it's going to
We do it every year.
do some money. I hope we have a good year coming up. Anybody else? Okay, all those in favor of 013705, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ordinance passes 7-0. An ordinance, the last one for this year, before we go to resolutions, 013805, an ordinance authorizing the adoption of an agreement with the Athens City Fire Department, City Firefighters, Local 3351 and the Ohio Council 8, AFSCME, FFL-CIO, concerning wages and working conditions, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Tamke.
Move that we would consider a 13805 under suspension. Second. The reason for the suspension is that I'd noted in Section 2 that the effective date of this agreement is November the 14th, 2004. This is our last scheduled meeting. It would be good to have this have this ordinance passed so we can then proceed with the
Other,
signing of the contract.
thank you. Other comments on suspension? Hearing none, all in favor of suspending the rules, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The rules are suspended, 7-0.
Move adoption of 013805. Second. I think the law director, were you going to say something at this time, Gary, about this?
I did in opening
in
comments.
remarks.
It's basically a
Okay.
3% salary increase in each of 3 years with the insurance concession to bring them in line with what the non-union personnel are paying as far as deductibles on prescriptions and medical insurance, and a minor adjustment in command pay and a minor adjustment in uniforms.
Okay. And since
For cost of living, basically.
And do I understand correctly, since the effective date is November the 14th, we're going to there'll be a lump sum, there'll be a makeup payment for that?
Yes. The auditor will be working on it right now, I suspect.
Okay. Looks like 6 weeks of pay.
No, it's a year. I think we read negotiations for a long
You're right,
time.
I was looking at the wrong year. So
But it is a year and 6 weeks.
Okay.
Well, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, 58
Oh, yeah, very,
weeks.
lots of retro pay.
Holy cow.
All right.
I'm assuming they took care of that in the appropriations.
We'll find out.
Yeah, there'll be some cleanup.
Any other comments on this ordinance? Hearing none, all in favor of 013805, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, 013805 is adopted. Now we're moving on to the next section, which is resolutions. And one reading resolution.
They're both the same.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to pass this to our colleague, Dale Tamke. There it is.
Oh, cool.
Cool. And the resolution that accompanies it is R-1205, a resolution expressing the appreciation of the City of Athens, Ohio to Dale Tamke for his public service. And the whereases are very important. Whereas Dale Tamke has generously given his time to be a public servant, serving as a council member at large from January 1998 to December 2005, and whereas Dale Tamke has been a hardworking, accessible, and productive member of council, chairing 2 council committees and serving on all council committees but one, and whereas Dale Tamke sought contributions and instituted the home program, Home Ownership Made Easier, designed to offer down payment assistance to low and moderate income families, and whereas Dale Tamke established the city's residential painting assistance program, providing grants to low moderate income families for exterior house painting, and whereas Dale Tamke served as co-chair of the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, fostering a genesis of community ideas and designing a vision for the future of the city of Athens, and whereas council wishes him great success in his future endeavors, be it resolved by the council of the city of Athens. And then section 1 says that the city of Athens does hereby express its appreciation to Dale Tamke for his faithful and distinguished service to the city as a member of council. And I'd like to clap and we've had some rough recent times, but Dale, thank you so much. Now I'd like to move that we adopt R-1205.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous? Now you need to sign.
And I abstain, Madam Chair.
Oh, I think you can sign. And one more.
Well, I would have a conflict if I were to vote on this, so
Oh, sore point. One for Sarah.
It better be in you.
There we go. And to accompany it, we have R 1305, a resolution expressing the appreciation of the city of Athens to Sarah Sexton for her public service. Whereas Sarah Sexton has generously given her time to be a public servant, serving as an at-large council member from January 2004 through December 2005. And whereas Sarah Sexton has been a viable voice for Ohio University students and judiciously represented the Athens community at large. And whereas Sarah Sexton has served as a member of the Civic Responsibility Task Force, and whereas City Council wishes to acknowledge the achievements of Sarah Sexton as an exemplary student, having received the honor of being named a Truman Scholar and a Mitchell Scholar, and whereas Council wishes her great success in her future endeavors. Be it resolved by the Council of the City of Athens, Ohio, that the City of Athens does hereby express its appreciation to Sarah Sexton for her faithful and distinguished service to the city as a member of council. I would like to move adoption of R 1305.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Now we'll clap. And we will sign as we finish up. And it's going to be downhill from here. It's just anticlimax, but now we will probably have opportunities for citizens to speak after announcements and other business, and then we'll have an executive session, so that's our plan. Our first plan is announcement and other business. We're going to, let's wait. Okay. So we all feel pressure, but it's just, yeah, Paul.
I'd like to thank both of you guys for being on council, really.
Yeah. Thanks to
It's been a
voters
good- It's been a good time.
most of the time.
We should have said that in discussion before the vote, but, you know.
Okay.
I flashed back to the time Dale had said to Susan he was interested in running for office, and she said, well, you need to talk to Bill Bias about city council, and we had lunch together many, many years ago up on Court Street about a decade ago, so stuff flies by.
Time flies.
Could I,
yeah.
do you mind? I have something I would like to
Please.
say. Is that okay?
Sure.
I mean, it's not in order, but.
Well, you can go up there since you're almost a citizen and
I'm
talk
almost
there.
a citizen, yeah. I'm still a citizen. This has been a really joy to do this. There are parts of it that I'm not going to miss at all, but there are much of it that I will miss. And I'm going to learn something from every one of you, and I'm going to tell you what I've learned from you.
Oh, dear.
So-
Oh, my.
And I'm just going to, Paul, it's probably highly symbolic that we sit at the opposite ends of this particular arrangement of council members. But I have come to admire the tenacity that you have, the single-mindedness that you have about issues, and really what I would say is an insatiable curiosity about things, the budget and other things. And I don't have that, I have to say. But I observe that in you, and I admire that. And, you know, I've often said the perfect's the enemy of the good, but you argue for the perfect, and that's okay. Carol, I remember when I went to your house, and we had or it was Bob Hines' house or somebody's house, and we were having a fundraiser, and for you, and I was sort of there to kind of sort of help support you, and I've never, ever, ever regretted that. Your appreciation for the arts and your ability to sort of thoroughly examine an issue in a dispassionate way has always impressed me. I mean, you're willing to change your mind. I mean, it takes courage to change your mind sometimes. And I remember you did it a couple of times, and I thought, I don't know that I would have had the courage to do that. And I appreciate that very much.
Dale, I've not served on council without you, and it's going to feel very strange.
Debbie, you're fearless in the way that you question things, and I hope I can sometimes rekindle that. I think you get tired up here sometimes, and you forget that you really have to ask those questions even if you've already answered them before, because they need to be answered for the people who are here on council, and they need to be answered for the people who are watching, because we have to remind them of why we do things. And so you're a fearless questioner, and I admire that about you, and I appreciate that. Nancy, you're a passionate person for the environment. You're passionate about procedure. You're passionate about the resources of the city, and that has put us on opposite sides of issues many times, but I've always felt that when we were through with that discussion, we would still care for each other and be
Agree to
friends.
disagree.
And that we have done some interesting and, I think, innovative things. And it's
Even
because of
today.
your creativity that has happened, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Sarah, I'm reminded by you that there's strength in being quiet occasionally. And I know that when you're sitting there and you're taking copious notes because I can see you, and your quietness is a tribute to the way that you deeply think about things, and that when you do say something, everybody listens to what you have to say, and that I think that will happen to you all your life. And it's been fun to run with you. We ran together, and that was really very special. Jim, I sort of think of you as my partner in radical ambivalence. Because we've sat here and we've talked, I've called you on the phone and we've talked about how, well, on the one hand, we think this, and on the other hand, we think that. And it was really been fun to work with someone who we find, you and I agree on a whole lot of things. And it's been a pleasure to nurture that relationship, and I've appreciated sitting beside you this amount of time. We've run together a lot, we've done chili cook-offs and all this sort of stuff, and I think I'll miss the friendship that we've had, and I've always appreciated your willingness to listen to me when I sort of want to rant about some stuff, and then you'll say, well, but what about? And then I'm like, oh, okay. Kathy, I'm not going to go all the way around the room, but I just have to say this. Kathy, I admired your courage to run for auditor. Because running from cover is one thing, but running when you know that if you lose, you're done. That's a brave thing to do. And I've also appreciated what you've done with the office, and the partnership that we've developed has been really significant, and I think the city is better off for you being there. And that what you're doing is really excellent. Bill, you bring the historical perspective, and you always remind us that many of the things that we've really talked about before. But that's valuable. We have to be reminded of that so we don't make those mistakes again. And I appreciate the way you run the meetings. I mean, you can't be rigid, you have to be flexible, you have to let people talk, and you've always valued the fact that however uncomfortable it is for us, we need to hear things that people send to us, and you make that happen in a way that makes us sit up and listen, but it's not overbearing, and it doesn't sort of become the tail that wags the dog, and that's an impressive thing to be able to do. It requires much skill, and I appreciate that. And Gary, I appreciate your wisdom, the support that you've given us. I mean, it was exhibited tonight. I don't know I don't always agree with what you have to say, but I know it's given to us in a thoughtful way, in a way that's intended to care about us and to care about the city. And I've learned a lot from you about what battles to fight and what battles not to fight. And I'm going to miss working with you. And finally, Debbie, this whole thing runs because of Debbie. If you want to know that there's somebody who's really critical to this whole thing, it's Debbie Walker. And Debbie, I'm going to miss, I'll let him in on the 8-year secret. She's been punching holes for me for 8 years. I asked her to create, because I was keeping my ordinances on a notebook, and she would punch the holes for me in the ordinances and put a clip on them. And today I gave her back all the paper clips that I had. But I think that's an indication of how much she really loves us, and that this is not just a job, it's a vocation, in the sense that a vocation is kind of a life's work. And this is her life's work, and we function because of her. And
Exactly.
I've not encountered someone who has the loyalty that you do. It's a rare thing, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate everyone that has come tonight, or come any night, and talked to us, because I've always thought that when they stop talking to us, that means they don't think we can do anything. When people say, well, aren't you aggravated when people call you on the phone? And, well, not really, because when they stop calling, that means they don't think you're worth anything anymore. So I'd rather leave with people still calling than with people not calling at all. And I appreciate you letting me have a few minutes to say that, because I needed to say that. And thank you, and I wish you all well in your future endeavors. Your plate is full, but I have confidence that you're going to govern well.
We'll see you next week, I guess.
Sarah? I know it's a dangerous thing to follow Dale, because he always says the right thing at the right time, but I just wanted to say that I'm a little emotional. Ever since the first day I decided to run for office, each one of you has just given me the respect as any other peer, and you've taught me the ropes, and you've taken the time, and you've had the patience to show me what it is to be a council person. And I just want you to know that you've all served as sort of a role model in different ways to me, and it's been incredibly formative in my life. And I have so much respect for the way that you serve the people of Athens, so, in our community. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice. All right. So, having the job of continuing things going, I guess we'll have opportunity for our citizens to speak on items not covered on our agenda. There are none. Good. We'll say, now we're going to move into executive session with the topic of labor negotiations looming large. Dale, how do you vote?
I think somebody has to
I
move for
move that we would go into executive session for the purpose of discussing labor negotiations, no pending litigation. No pending labor negotiations, the session to include the law director, the mayor, and the auditor. The acting mayor and the auditor. Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye.
Paul
Okay.
seconded that, by the way.
Yeah, and it's 2 minutes.
Yeah.
We're going to have 2 minutes to take the cameras out, and then we'll be there.
And we're just going to adjourn when we come back.
Yes, we will have nothing.